What I would like to talk about today is a 100-year plan to change the core structure of America. A plan that began really in 1919 or 1920. And so we're now 100 years into this plan. The plan was detailed in 1961, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But this is a second in the series on To Save a Nation, and it's things that we can do in order to preserve a culture that has been the best culture in the history of the world, the best nation, I would suggest, in the history of the world, that's done the most good in the history of the world. Not perfect by any means, but certainly a wonderful place to live, to raise children, and to have an impact, a positive impact on the lives of others, both other people and other nations. On June 1st, the headline shouted, "Historic St. John's Church near the White House is set on fire as protests rage in Washington, D.C., and churches across the United States and Europe burned throughout 2020. August 1st, there was this Twitter post. Left-wing activists bring a stack of Bibles to burn in front of the federal courthouse in Portland. And the post featured a video that showed protesters with Black Lives Matter signs tossing Bibles into a raging bonfire with a plastic pig on top. That's the upper left picture above. And then rioters demand, and you've seen this in so many places, on so many news broadcasts, in so many newspaper articles, defund the police. And amazingly, politicians have complied. And so the question is there a connection between all these things? And I would suggest to you there is. And to show that, I suggest we go back and consider a book that was written in 1961. It was called The Naked Communist. It was written by Cleon Skousen. He was with the FBI, and he had recorded and printed the major goals of the communist movement. And those goals were printed in 1961. And the things that we see happening now were predicted back in 61. In fact, the things that have happened between then and now. And the 100-year Marxist plot to take over America is almost complete. In this list, he details the itemized goals that would be necessary to destroy Christianity in America, destroy the Republic, and implement a godless Marxist system of government. I'd like to go through a portion of those goals. The heading above, Redefine Rioting as Protest, is my summary. Below that is specifically what the goal was that was the Marxist goal. Create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and use united force to solve economic, political, or social problems. We are seeing exactly that today. Mayor Bill de Blasio says all of the protesting and looting and rioting reminds him of John Lennon's Imagine, a utopian dream song. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin stated that in the city, there are 4 blocks, or were at that time, that are more like a block party atmosphere, and we could have the summer of love. That was reported on CNN on June 11th. Second goal, normalize rioting, looting, and mayhem. Specifically, use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. Well, rioting and looting have been praised by governors, mayors, and city councils. In New York City, all large gatherings are illegal except Black Lives Matter protests. Canceling individuals and companies is happening all around us. Black Lives Matter, Chaz or CHOP, whichever you call it, Antifa, and other groups have outsized influence and are spoken of positively in the media. Then undermine and terminate law enforcement. The goal, specifically discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI. Well, the FBI's integrity is now severely damaged. Prisons, we see, are being emptied. Bail is eliminated in New York City and elsewhere. Things we never thought we would see happen have happened. And then defund the police. The goal specifically stated in 1961 was transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies, treat all behavioral problems as psychiatric disorders which no one but psychiatrists can understand or treat. We've seen this. New York City reduced the NYPD budget by $1 billion and transferred the money to social agencies, who will now respond to domestic disputes and summer youth programs. They also will respond in cases of rape and any number of other situations where in the past the police would have responded. The Los Angeles City Council on July 2nd, 2020, approved a $150 million cut to the LAPD's budget for the next fiscal year, a move that followed activists mounting calls to defund the police. The council voted amazingly 12-2, with only 2 councilmen opposing the resolution. Get America to fund its enemies. The goal, provide American aid to all nations regardless of communist domination. Extend long-term loans to Russia and Soviet satellites. That happened. America has given foreign aid with few or no restrictions for over 6 decades. Lenin wrote this: when it comes time to hang the capitalists, they will vie with each other to sell the rope. Normalize relations with communist China. They're so normal today that we can't even imagine that this was once a goal. We're trying to unravel and unwind that goal. The specific goal stated was grant recognition of Red China and admit Red China to the United Nations. That happened. In 1972, 11 years after The Naked Communist was written, President Richard Nixon officially recognized Communist China and began the process of normalizing relations with them. And China subsequently became America's largest trading partner. Expand Russian control. The specific goal, set up East and West Germany as separate states in spite of Khrushchev's promise in 1955 to settle the Germany question through free elections under supervision of the UN. Well, a united Germany is now led by Angela Merkel, who grew up in East Germany. In 1968, Merkel joined the Free German Youth, the official communist youth movement sponsored by the ruling Marxist-Leninist Socialist Unity Party of Germany. At the Academy of Sciences, she became a member of its FDJ secretariat, and according to her former colleagues, she openly propagated Marxism as the Secretary for Agitation and Propaganda. She was a classmate of Vladimir Putin, and Germany, it is no surprise, has grown much closer to Russia in the last 10 years. It's amazing when you begin looking at the background and such, and things that are covered up, never presented in the press. Leverage American ingenuity against America. Note the label on the right, an American company, that's the advertising with a flag, and it says package and product designed in the USA. And then under that, made in China, made in China, made in China. The specific goal laid out was permit free trade between all nations regardless of communist affiliation and regardless of whether or not items could be used for war. Huawei and other Chinese companies are agents of the Chinese state. All companies in China potentially can be called on to act as agents of the Chinese state. China purchases American companies and employs them for its own advantage. I know this firsthand. I spent a good deal of time in China, and China made offers to buy our company. Transfer intellectual property to communist governments. The specific goal, continue giving Russia access to the U.S. Patent Office. Well, China and Russia routinely and easily steal American secrets. The Clinton administration gave military secrets for quiet submarine operations to the Chinese. The Obama State Department gave 20% of America's yellow cake uranium to Russia. That was reported in the New York Times, April 23rd, 2015. Shift the UN to favor communism. The specific goal, allow all Soviet satellites individual representation in the United Nations. Well, the United Nations is no longer pro-American. There is no pretense. There is no attempt to show that it is pro-American, whether it's on American property or not. It is pro-China, pro-Russia, pro-Muslim. We've seen recently the World Health Organization was so substantially oriented towards Chinese goals that the United States and the world suffered massively, and thousands or tens of thousands of people died as a direct result. Promote the United Nations as superior to the United States of America. The specific goal delineated was promote the UN as the only hope for mankind. If its charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a one world government with its own independent armed forces. Well, the United Nations and the World Court were viewed by President Obama as superior to our own Supreme Court. You may recall that on October 1st, 2015, Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced at the United Nations that her office would be working in several American cities to form what she called the Strong Cities Network, a law enforcement initiative that would encompass the globe, overriding American laws up to and including the United States Constitution, in favor of United Nations laws that would henceforth be implemented in the United States itself without any consultation of Congress at all. And you may know that in our last few elections and in this upcoming one, the United Nations will send watchers to observe our election process to make sure that it's being carried out fairly. Divest the Panama Canal. Specific goal, internationalize the Panama Canal. This happened 1977, September 7th. President Jimmy Carter signed a treaty that gave Panama control over the Panama Canal, and that would begin in the year 2000. The treaty ended an agreement signed in 1904 between Theodore Roosevelt, who was president at that time, and Panama, which gave the United States the right to build the canal and a renewable lease to control 5 miles of land along either side of it. In other words, renewable in perpetuity. Jimmy Carter changed that, and in May 2017, the Chinese company Landbridge Group signed a $900 million deal to control the Margarita Island port, which is Panama's largest port. And this deal, while committing Landbridge Group to the maintenance of the port facilities, actually provided access to one of the most important goods distribution centers in the world, because Margarita Port, you see, is the gatekeeper to the Panama Canal. Keep the Communist Party legal in the United States. Specific goal, resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. Well, Joseph McCarthy, of course, was censured and ultimately left the Senate in dishonor. The Communist Party USA still exists, and it fields candidates for office. Organizations that seek the violent overthrow of the government used to be illegal in the United States of America. They are no longer outlawed in America. The Communist Party USA is currently celebrating its 100th anniversary. Undermine loyalty and patriotism. The specific goal, do away with all loyalty oaths. Children no longer must say the Pledge of Allegiance. That was the place where we initially trained our children to be loyal to the United States of America, long before they became soldiers in the military, long before they became politicians. They would every day say the Pledge of Allegiance. Civics was a major course in each of our schools. Well, flag burning is no longer against the law. Patriotism is openly decried on college campuses. Leaks of top secret information are now being viewed as whistleblowing. Flying the flag itself is viewed as provocative and offensive. Redefine American laws to favor Marxist goals. Specifically, use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. The organization that has been used primarily to enforce this specific goal. It's the American Civil Liberties Union. We'll talk more about that at some point in the future. But the ACLU has successfully used stare decisis decisions, that is, precedent, to inch by inch, little by little, reverse the meaning of various laws, even the amendments in the Bill of Rights. And they have now redefined much of the Bill of Rights to mean the direct opposite of its original meaning. Freedom of speech no longer means what it once meant. Freedom of speech now means freedom from hearing anything with which you disagree. Freedom of religion means freedom from hearing God honored in public. Remove God from education. The specific goal, eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the ground that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. Well, separation of church and state was never in the Constitution. It doesn't say that. It just says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or denying the free exercise thereof. And prayer and Bible reading were always in the schools from America's inception. In 1963, prayer was removed from the classroom in the Murray versus Curlett decision. There was also an Abington School decision reinforcing the same thing. Madeleine Mary O'Hare was a committed Marxist. And after being rejected in her attempt to move to Russia, she moved instead to Baltimore, and she used her son Bill to destroy prayer in schools. Bill ultimately became a follower of Jesus Christ and did what he could to try to speak against and unwind this horrible decision of the Supreme Court. He obviously has been unsuccessful. Take over public and private education. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda, soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations, put the party line in textbooks, gain control of all student newspapers. This is a specific goal that is absolutely key to what they've been doing. I'm going to read this again. Their goal, this is in 1961, and actually well predates that, but recorded for us in the book, The Naked Communists in 1961, get control of the schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda, soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations, put the party line in textbooks, gain control of all student newspapers. That happened. Christians and conservatives are not welcome at most colleges and universities today. Openly Marxist professors and administrators teach and control the teachers' unions. Most schools use Howard Zinn's rewritten history. Zinn was a Marxist. He rewrote the history to emphasize things that were the worst things that happened in America's history and to totally de-emphasize or omit all of the wonderful and great things that happened in the establishment of this country and what this country has done. And now you have schools beginning to use material from the 1619 Project, a project that attempts to really completely redefine American history. And you're even hearing calls to stop teaching American history in the schools. Control public communications. The specific goal stated, infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, and policymaking positions. June 16th, 2020, NBC sought to get Google to demonetize The Federalist, Zero Hedge, and Breitbart.com, three conservative news organizations. The press is now openly attempting to shut down the few remaining conservative organs. Bias overwhelmingly in the press favors a progressive agenda, but far more than that. Very favorable towards Marxism, very favorable towards socialism. Barry Weiss, an op editor at the New York Times, resigned, and she reported on just how bad progressive bullying was there. And she said, showing up for work as a centrist at an American newspaper should not require bravery. Control what people see and hear. The specific goal, gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. Skillful editing changes have been made so that the meaning of statements that were made by the president and by many others is reversed. You may recall when he was reported as having mocked a handicapped newspaper reporter. And he spoke about the reporter and then made hand motions that appeared to be mockery of that reporter. Except when you see his original speech, there were almost 7 minutes in between when he spoke about the reporter and made the hand movements. However, what got reported in the press was as if the two things happened one right after the other. He never mocked the reporter. The press does this routinely. Last week they did something like that to Kayleigh McEnany and terminated or cut a video early so that it made it appear as if she was saying exactly the opposite of what she was actually intending to say. Well, multiple studies have shown the liberal bias of most of the media, now more than liberal, much farther left than just old liberal. And then you have this problem where Hollywood is substantially funded by the Chinese. I watched a wonderful movie the other day. It was called Greyhound, starring Tom Hanks. And right at the very beginning, you see that it is funded by a Chinese organization. And so what we have now is you have various media organizations that have to make sure that the Chinese are not upset by what is presented. Mockery or even just criticism, even mild criticism of the Chinese takeover of Hong Kong is not permitted, and people get fired or defunded in America because of that. You may remember the NBA's discussions with regards to China and how ultimately the Chinese viewpoint won. Normalize communism in politics. The specific goal was eliminate the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Well, that committee was shut down in 1975, and the Communist Party celebrated its 100th anniversary with many of its programs included in the Democrat Biden-Sanders unity platform. Gain mainstream political power. Their specific goal, and listen closely to this one, capture one or both of the political parties in the United States, and you can decide for yourself whether or not that has happened. The Democrat Party has now formally embraced socialism in its Biden-Sanders unity platform. Bernie Sanders does not call himself a Democrat. He calls himself a socialist. But he is working with the Democrats and certainly came close to getting the party's nomination. Black Lives Matter has been endorsed by the Democrat Party. BLM leadership has publicly stated that they are trained Marxists seeking to destroy the nuclear family. Discredit American culture. Specific goal, continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. An American communist cell was told to eliminate, quote, eliminate all good sculpture from parts and buildings, substitute shapeless, awkward, and meaningless forms, unquote. Well, several museums as recently as this year are now presenting graffiti as art. Take over the arts and sciences. Specific goal, control art critics and directors of art museums. Quote, our plan is to promote ugliness, repulsiveness, meaningless art, unquote. Now, it's amazing, but the museums have gone even further than that. The Smithsonian released a statement on whiteness just recently. In June, quote, while Americans were focused on the protests and riots that engulfed U.S. cities in the wake of the horrific police killing of George Floyd, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture released an outline, quote, teaching tool, unquote, called Talking About Race. The page dedicated to whiteness includes an infographic attributing various aspects of American culture to whiteness or white dominant culture. Among other things, this graphic suggests that the nuclear family science, capitalism, and the Judeo-Christian tradition, in fact, Christianity itself, are forms of oppressive whiteness that non-white people should reject as part of an oppressive system. Destroy American decency. In the 50s, early 60s, and before, look at an old movie. Look at a movie from the 40s or the 50s or the 30s, and you see America was basically a decent place. The stated goal was break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Well, today the youngest child can view pornography online. And the coarsest language and most vulgar is presented easily in the media. Promote deviant behavior. Specifically, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Could you have imagined this whole concept of drag queen story hour, drag queen story time? Drag story time. These are children's events, first started in 2015 by author and activist Michelle T. in San Francisco. And you would have thought, well, San Francisco, maybe. But that's spread throughout the entire country. And support for the LGBTQ agenda is part of the Democrat platform. Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 women. We talked about that earlier, 2 of whom claimed to be homosexuals. And by the way, 2 are married to transgenders, one to a trans woman, the other to a trans man. All 3 claim to be Marxist trained. Make Christianity obscene and pornography healthy. The specific goal, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. Using the name of Jesus is questioned, while out-and-out cursing is protected. September 5th, 2012 headline, quote, convention floor erupts as Dems restore references to God, Jerusalem in platform, unquote. Can you imagine a political party where people were upset because God was being restored to the platform, and then God was booed at the 2016 Democrat convention? Can you imagine that? Destroy Christianity and Judaism in America. The specific goal, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a, quote, religious crutch, unquote. Remember, Marx said that religion was the opiate of the masses? And wherever you find a Marxist government, you find persecution and the attempt to eliminate Christianity. You see what's going on in China today, and you see what's going on throughout much of the world. Although 7 out of 10 Americans consider themselves to be Christian, it is amazing, but just 6% actually possess a biblical worldview. Just 1/5 of those attending evangelical Protestant churches, that's actually 21%, have a biblical worldview. This is per the Barna Group study in March 31st of this year, as compared to 1/6 of those attending charismatic or Pentecostal churches. The study finds even smaller proportions in mainline Protestant or Catholic churches. The number of American adults holding a biblical worldview has declined by 50% over the past quarter century. And then regarding the youngest adult generation, the numbers are even more startling. A mere 2% of those 18 to 29 years old possess a biblical worldview. Undermine and or rewrite the U.S. Constitution. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. You've heard politicians say this. You've probably heard people in the media say this as well. Here is a quote from the Huffington Post, August 3rd, 2014. The Constitution is a political blueprint for a time when white Black people. The average lifespan was 35 years old, and news was spread through people yelling on the street, unquote. Why is the nation so poorly governed? This is the question that we address in our new book, Relic. This is from the Hoover Institution. What we show is that the fundamentals of an answer can be traced to the Constitution, which for all its admirable qualities imposes a structure of government that has long been outdated and is ill-suited to modern times. So a think tank, the Hoover Institution, wrote that. Undermine and rewrite American history. The specific goal: belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the big picture. American exceptionalism is presented as a myth in higher education. You may remember that President Obama, when he was asked about American exceptionalism, said, "I think America is exceptional in the same way that every country thinks it is exceptional." Howard Zinn set out to rewrite American history, and he did that. He wrote a history designed to emphasize the so-called marginalized peoples and to de-emphasize and denigrate those who were in positions of leadership, and even those whose lives and histories have been glorified and praised. And he wrote over 20 books, including A People's History of the United States and A Young People's History of the United States. These are the books that are used in most colleges and universities, and also in the grammar schools and high schools in our nation. The kids today do not learn that we once learned. Destroy faith in America's founders. The picture to the right is a picture of George Washington, or statue of George Washington, that has been destroyed, and it says genocidal colonist on the side. Discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats. That was the specified goal. Washington, Jefferson, and others are now being viewed as slaveholders without any moral legitimacy. Of 184 statues taken down since protests began, now this was written about 3 weeks ago, 33 were statues of Columbus, 9 of the founding fathers, 8 of St. Junipero Serra. And those were the most torn down. It's not Confederate soldiers that are being removed. It is our founders. A book was released by the Smithsonian Magazine, The Dark Side of Thomas Jefferson, a new portrait of the founding father, challenging the long-held perception of Thomas Jefferson as a benevolent slaveholder. So it's not enough to say he was a slaveholder. Now they want to say, well, he wasn't even a benevolent slaveholder as a slaveholder. Implement socialism incrementally as a pathway to Marxism. Support any socialist movement, the specified goal, support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture: education, social agencies, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc. The graph on the left shows how spending has increased as a percent of GDP for socialist programs. And we've seen socialized medicine. We've seen an attempt to get guaranteed income. And in fact, we've seen some elements of that even now in the response to COVID. We've seen free housing. We've seen so many other areas where they have moved in a direction that you can only describe as socialist/Marxist. I believe it was Stalin who said that socialized medicine is the keystone to the establishment of Marxism. Control labor. The stated goal: infiltrate and gain control of more unions. There already were unions that were under Marxist control at that time. Today, the teachers' unions in some states will not return to class unless the police are defunded first. The LA Times reported this on June 8th. We have to dismantle white supremacy. We must defund the police and bring in the mental health services that our students need. There they were quoting Cicely Meyer Cruz, the incoming president of UTLA, the teachers union there, which represents about 30,000 teachers, nurses, counselors, and other staff in the school district. And then All NFL players in a recent game took a knee, and the NFL is now publicly supporting Black Lives Matter and has apologized for not doing so in the past. Control big business. This one is a little bit of a surprise, but the goal was infiltrate and gain control of big business. That appears to be happening. The cancel culture sought to cancel Goya Foods, just for a positive statement made by the president of Goya Foods. Hundreds of businesses openly support Black Lives Matter. These include businesses like Nike, Airbnb, Amazon, Apple, Uber, Coca-Cola, Facebook, YouTube. You may recall that Nike removed a pair of sneakers from its inventory that had an American flag on it because Colin Kaepernick objected. Reporter David Hookstead spoke to a sales rep at the NBA store who told him he could not buy a Free Hong Kong jersey, but he can buy a Kill Cops jersey. Because in the NBA store, you can have anything you want written above the number on the back of the jersey, except the things like Free Hong Kong that might upset the Chinese. Undermine parental authority. Stated goal, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents, attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to the suppressive influence of parents. Well, what do we see today? American parents today face a perfect storm of cultural and social circumstances that undermine the very foundations of parental authority. That's what Psychotherapy Networker wrote. We see it. And you know that there are things that if your parents who raised you did those today, you would have been taken away from them in today's world. Things have changed. Parents are no longer the ultimate authority with regards to their children. The whole concept of it takes a village is that it's not parents that are needed. It's the village that needs to protect the child. Destroy ultimately the traditional nuclear family. Specific goal, discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. We have seen this happen. No-fault divorce is now the law in most states. It was not in 1961. Marriage is no longer a societal prerequisite for having children. It's very common for couples to have children and then they may or may not get married. The stigma that was associated with being fatherless is long since gone. Black Lives Matter openly states its intention to destroy the nuclear family. Go and take a look at the website. Well, I haven't gone through all of them, but I think you get the sense of what has been happening in America on our watch, what has been happening over the past century, in fact, to dislodge the foundations of this nation and to replace them. And you may say, well, how could this possibly be happening? Well, we have to recognize that there is a war in the heavenlies. What we read in the book of Ephesians is that we need to be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. We need to put on the full armor of God so that we can take our stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, we are told, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, when the types of things that we're facing now arrive, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything to stand, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And most importantly, pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Beseech God to intervene We read in 2 Chronicles 7:14, a verse you are all familiar with. When I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or command locusts to devour the people, or send COVID among my people, a plague among my people. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now my eyes will be open, my ears attentive to the prayers offered in this place. So these are the things that we must do. Pray. In Ephesians, we read, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Prayer, Andrew Murray said, is the power that moves the hand of God. If we want God to intervene, we must pray. But there are things we must do beyond that. We must vote. The people we elect are the people who will decide the future. 37% of evangelicals did not vote in the last election. Speak up, because silence is taken as our assent when others speak and we do not. We should not be cowed into silence. We should proclaim Jesus Christ in the midst of all of the things that are occurring. The solution to the world's problems are not found in political solutions. It is men and women who are broken. It is not systems. And these cannot be fixed by fixing systems. And the only way that people are repaired is through the gospel of Jesus Christ.